Let's get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Today on the Prenup Podcast with matrimonial and family lawyer, Jackie Combs. Welcome to another episode of the Prenup Podcast, and I'm so happy to have Jackie Combs here with me. She is dialing in from LA while I am actually in Italy. So this is a exciting pod that we're recording together. Very, very all over the place, but I love this. And one of my favorite things is that Jackie actually slid into my DMs on TikTok and completely called me out for something that I had posted that was not true, which, I had seen someone else talk about for prenups. And she was like, that's actually not technically true. And so I said, let's get into it. Let's talk about all these things. And so welcome, Jackie.
Hi, so excited to be here. So excited.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you're a divorce lawyer, but that's about all I know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a family law and matrimonial attorney. I represent high net worth individuals and celebrity clients. I've been practicing law over 13 years and family law exclusively for 8. Prior to that, I was a corporate attorney and worked in-house at a publicly traded company. I'm from Southern California, born and raised, and probably never leaving.
So where did you grow up in Southern California?
LA and then Santa Barbara. And then I was back in LA for college, law school in Orange County, really have not left a 200-mile radius.
Did you always want to be a lawyer?
Yeah, that or a doctor, but I wasn't really good at chemistry. So found my way with the law.
Were either of your parents lawyers?
No, they're not. No.
So how did you decide, when was the spark where you're like, hey, I think I want to be a lawyer or a doctor?
I mean, I think it was when I was 5, I was pretty determined. It was that or being president, and that's just not going to happen. but, I do have other family members who are lawyers. I think, it was very inspired to be able to help people in a professional capacity, and that's what I do.
Well, growing up, did you have siblings?
Yeah, I have an older brother who's a teacher, and just us.
The two of you. And are your parents still married?
Yep. My parents are still married. They've actually celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary this past year.
I love that. What do they tell you their secret is?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, you've got to grow together, right? And I'll say this, my grandparents actually just celebrated their, I want to say 72nd or 73rd wedding anniversary. They're in their late 90s, still married. And, and at the end of the day, not every day is going to be rainbow and sunshines, but you have to be a team. And I think that that's something that I've discovered, obviously with the work that I do. And you, at the end of the day, are a partnership. And that's really what marriage is about.
Yeah. Okay. So you are married.
Yes. Yes.
How did you meet your husband?
I actually met him the day after I graduated law school when I was 23 years old. My best friend worked with him and wanted to introduce us, and we've been together ever since.
Oh my goodness. And how did you guys meet? Did you just
Oh, yeah. So it was the day after.
Yeah, did he text you? Did he? Was it?
Yeah. So funny, day after law school, so it's the only weekend you can go out before you're studying for the bar, right? And my best friend was like, hey, I have to go to this event for work, and the agent that's putting it on for his client, and it was a photography, huge, some gallery party for his client, Tyler Shields at the time, and my best friend said, the agent who's putting it on, my husband was an entertainment agent at the time, is an attorney. You should meet him. And I was like, okay, great. Sounds like a fun party. It's the only weekend I can go out. So go to the party. And then she says, this is Jeff. You should meet him. Isn't he cute? I said, this is a great party. Not realizing that she had wanted to set us up for 8 months, but I was focusing on school. And anyways, by the end of the night, he did get my number. And like I said, we've been together ever since.
Oh, that's so cute. I love that. Yeah. Is he from California also?
He is. He's from Orange County.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So you fall in love with your now husband. You post-graduation, you study for the bar. When during your time at law school did you decide you wanted to be a family lawyer?
Oh, great question. I didn't. I thought being a family lawyer was like the worst thing that you could be. I wanted to be a corporate attorney, doing mergers and acquisitions. And actually, the first summer that I worked as an attorney or had my first summer internship, I worked at First American Financial Corporation or First American Title Insurance Company, which is a publicly traded company. And because I thought I wanted to be corporate attorney in real estate, and I was in Orange County. And that's what I did. And it was my first summer. It was my first job out of law school. I had a great career. I was on and off with the company, I think about like 6 or 7 years. And I loved the company. I felt like home at the company. And I ultimately had a very high level job where I oversaw different divisions within the company. And, but I will say this. I saw the trajectory of my career and I really wanted something different and I wanted something more for myself and a little bit more human contact and to be able to, really help. When I was a corporate attorney, I was negotiating, multi-million-dollar contracts and it was great. It just wasn't, something was missing. So I, took a leap of faith and serendipitously fell into family law. And here I am and haven't looked back.
Okay. Tell me more about this serendipity of falling into law. Was there like a case? Was there a moment? Was there a connection? How did it happen? Because that is a shift from, like kind of comfortable and in some sense maybe to like being like, okay, purpose driven in a way.
Totally. So one of the partners that I work with, who I have incredible respect for, she and I did a workout class together. And ultimately, we were talking about what we each did. And I was looking for something different. She was looking for a new associate at the time. And we kind of just clicked and it sounded fun and interesting. And at the end of the day, I'm still negotiating deals. The deals are just different. And with my kind of clients, they're very high net worth and you're not fighting over pots and pans, though sometimes people do. You're really, winding down companies and doing very interesting financial dissolution, creating creative solutions for clients who are, navigating the next phase of their lives. And so, I thought my corporate background has really helped with that.
Amazing. I love that. Okay. So you make the transition in and I mean, it must have been such like an interesting new adventure for you to have people's personal egos in a different way in the courtroom and in your office instead of in, the classic boardrooms that you had been in. How was that transition of really leaning into like, representing individuals in a more intimate way?
Very much more intimate, right? Much more personal. I'm in everybody's bank accounts and bedrooms. I know the deepest secrets of my clients, more than what they're willing in so many ways to tell their own therapists. So it is a very different relationship. And, I'm happy and grateful that I'm in a position where I can really help people in different, phases of their lives, whether they're getting married, they're, dealing with a separation or they're getting divorced.
What typically for you right now, because I know you're across family law, what are you doing more divorces? Are you doing estate planning? Are you doing prenups or is it just everything?
So I represent clients in all aspects of family law, not in estate planning. So prenups, postnuptial agreements, cohabitation agreements, which I've definitely seen a larger rise on, is particularly with my younger clients, and paternity actions. So when people are not married, and then of course, divorces and post-judgment issues.
Yeah. So tell me more about that. Tell me more about this whole idea of people doing just like contracts and not necessarily getting married.
Yeah. So cohabitation agreements are great. I think they're one of the most underrated agreements that individuals can enter into when they are in a relationship. What it really addresses is, defines your property rights and support rights when you are dating somebody. And particularly when you're moving in with somebody, right? So if somebody is saying, hey, or if your significant other is saying, hey, I really want you to move in with me. Well, but I want to make it very clear that you don't have an ownership interest in my home. Or, you have two clients who are not planning to get married right now or two individuals that are not planning to get married right now who are buying a home together and they want to very clearly define what their ownership rights and responsibilities are with respect to that home purchase.
That actually leads me into a question that a friend of mine had asked, which is, oftentimes what ends up, especially probably in your case with the type of clients that you represent, is how can you guide a couple through, I would say, balancing rights to a home, whether it's in a prenup or whether it's in um, a cohabitation agreement when one person has a lot more wealth and they might own the home themselves and the other individual, might not be financially contributing to it, but in some way, shape or form, they might be taking care of it. They might be contributing in a different way. What's the best way to navigate something like that?
So I think it depends whether or not they're, number one, before marriage, right? Versus when they are getting married. If you are not married and there is no intention to get married and your significant other is not contributing equity to the property, I mean, that home is really yours. Even if they are making it a home and, contributing to the decorating and things like that, to the extent that there's no equity being contributed towards capital improvements or towards the acquisition cost, and you're really paying for the property taxes, the insurance, the mortgage expenses, it's really your homes. Some people may disagree with that. And if you want to be generous with your partner, I think that's a great thing, but it is your homes.
Okay. So let's get into some of the questions that were fielded to me this week from a few friends, which, one of my favorites is the goal of most prenups to be equitable or equal, fair or just, or is that a disillusion?
Great question. So family law is a court of equity. I believe that all prenups should be equitable. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to agree on every specific issue, but obviously you're going to reach a compromise to enter into that contract. At the end of the day, you have a prenup, which is defined by the law, unless you enter into one. So I think when partners go into getting a prenup, they really need to consider, what are their long-term goals? Is it a first marriage? Is it a second marriage? Are they planning to have children together? Is one coming in with, significant wealth or family wealth? All of these circumstances are going to change the conversation about what you are going to do in that prenuptial agreement, because no size shoe fits all, right?
Yeah, totally.
If I could speak. But I think when you are aligned on what your goals are, the terms of the agreement can reflect that. And I always tell my clients, be more generous in the prenup, right? It's more important that you are building a life together and you're having a happy marriage than, fighting over a $20,000 contribution to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I bet I would assume that oftentimes you see someone's true colors when it comes to this. And if they're going to be generous in this moment, they're hopefully going to be generous later, which is also if they're not going to be generous or they're going to go tit for tat this early on, that might be a sign of what it's going to be like in the future.
Absolutely. And those are very difficult conversations that you have to have with your client when their partners are not being generous, not treating them as a financial partner or seeing the value that they add. Because, for example, when you have a client who, it may become a stay-at-home mom, when there is not consideration for the fact that she may, or he, if they're stay-at-home dad, may give up their careers to support their significant other. Like, that's when I have the conversation, well, maybe we shouldn't have, a spousal support limitation or waiver, right? Maybe absolutely I'm having that conversation. Maybe we need to create more, community property or more gifts for you so that you have financial security in the event something doesn't work out because you've given up or you're anticipating to give up, your career building years to support your significant other.
Yeah, that was another thing someone asked was, what's the smartest thing someone can do to protect themselves if they decide to be a stay-at-home parent? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest things to do is make sure that you have, I would say accounts just for yourself. Two would be to, not necessarily agree to a spousal support limitation or waiver, or maybe include sunset provisions, or modify the law in a way that ensures that you have extra protection for the years that you are not working.
Is there anything that you've ever seen get creative in a prenup around that? Like any type of, as you said, something that's generous. It's like, hey, if you're going to be giving up those years to make money and to get a 401k and all these things, and you're taking kind of a backseat in a way, even though you are contributing because you're raising your family and that's a job itself. Like, are there any unique things that you've seen people put into prenups that are a little differentiated?
I think it depends on what the financial circumstances are coming in. But, to the extent that you can create, in California, we're community property state, so you can create more community property than you would otherwise be provided under the law. So for example, if I have a client who's going into a marriage and marrying somebody who's coming from extraordinary wealth or has already had a huge exit or IPO from their company, and they have significant separate property, and the goal is to be able to raise children, and for my client to be able to be a stay-at-home mom, well, maybe, there are gifts every single year of marriage from her partner's separate property. Or maybe, after the 5th year of marriage, they're going to waive their separate property rights in their marital home and, make little gifts and increments along the way to ensure that your client has more financial security in the event something, changes.
Yeah, this actually leads perfectly into another question that someone had, which was, how do you help your clients identify blind spots around assets, legacy, or family obligations that might create tension later? So say, someone has a trust or that hasn't materialized yet, or maybe an expected inheritance that hasn't hit yet. Like, how does someone navigate that?
Yeah. Well, as part of the prenuptial process, which is one of the best things, is you have to have full financial disclosures. Therefore, you have to lay it all out there, all your assets, all your debts, what your income is, exchanging tax returns, have these nitty-gritty conversations that so many couples don't have and that they should have, particularly before getting into getting married. My job is to spot those blind spots, right? That is my job for my clients, so that they understand, okay, your significant other is going to come into a large inheritance, or, their trust fund is going to make a huge distribution at the time they're 40, let's say. That will significantly change your life. You're going to live at a lifestyle, potentially live at a lifestyle that is much greater than what you would otherwise be able to afford based on your respective salaries. So number one, we have to take into consideration what that means for support. Number two, we have to take into consideration, while that may be your significant other's separate property, whether they would be willing to make a gift to the marital estate because you would be living at such a higher, standard of living only because of this. So really, the conversation ebbs and flows. And of course, when I have clients who are coming in, from the flip side, where they are the ones who are the moneyed spouse, I'm always like, well, where can you be generous, or where would you be willing to be generous to ensure that your partner feels safe and secure financially in your marriage?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, so because of these types of conversations, right? I assume that you've seen couples disagree and go back and forth and get anxious. And how do you kind of guide couples through disagreements during this process so they don't lose trust in each other and don't have resentment? Because I feel I've watched some friends who go through it. And of course, I always say the moment you get engaged, or even before you get engaged, start talking about a prenup so it doesn't become this like tension right before the wedding. But, what are some things that you recommend to couples so they can realize that this is actually like a generous thing that they're going to do for each other instead of, a tear down?
Totally. So number one, I want my clients to get married, right? This is supposed to be the happiest, time, one of the most, happiest times of their lives. And it's important that we keep this process both collaborative and positive. The framework for prenup is that it creates a framework for a financially successful marriage because you know what your financial rights and obligations are going into marriage, and you have financial expectations, and there's no misaligned values. You have all the details up front. So what I would say for any client is, number one, you should, or, any individual is, number one, you should be talking about a prenup well before you get engaged. You should, two, align your prenup with what your goals are, exactly, with what your goals are for your life, right? Because again, going to that example, if somebody's going to be a stay-at-home parent, they want to have security in the event something doesn't work out. Or if you're going to change, move states to support your spouse's career, or, take a seat back so that your spouse, can really move up the corporate ladder or have a big IPO or whatever it is, or travel on set and, make multi-millions of dollars a year per film. So things like that.
Okay. This was a really interesting one. What have you seen gone wrong in prenups for high net worth or blended family situations? And any advice on how to prevent those emotional and legal pitfalls?
So when you say blended family, do you mean with
If someone's
individuals
been
who have,
married before or has children, might have an extreme amount of wealth, they get married a second time to someone who might not have that wealth or children?
yeah, great question. So the conversation I'm going to have with my, let's say 25-year-old client is very different than the conversation that I'm going to have with my 55-year-old client who has 3 grown children and is getting into a second marriage. When you are navigating those conversations, number one, you have to look at if there are any provisions regarding your assets related, from your initial divorce. And if you've agreed to set up, trust funds for your children, or if you've agreed to leave any certain assets. 2 is, the conversation that the individual really has to have with their own children, presuming that the children are adults. If their children are not adults and they're young children, determining what you want to ensure for them before your new spouse. And then 3, make sure that your significant other knows up front that, hey, I'm coming into this marriage, let's say with $10 million, using an example. Whatever we build together, I'm happy to share in that with you. But the first 10 million, I want to make sure that my kids are protected. And I think that's an acceptable thing to do as long as you are upfront about what feels right for you, feels right for your children, and there's no misaligned values or expectations.
What about someone who's coming into a marriage with, an ex-partner, children, still paying spousal support to them and child support? How do you navigate something like that where it's already, that person's already making a commitment to pay, and already kind of has a situation at hand?
Totally. So that is their, legal obligation. When they get remarried, it's still their, in California at least, it's still their obligation. The income that their spouse makes is not in consideration of their financial obligations, with some deviations when it would be otherwise like totally unfair. I think you have to have that conversation up front, like, here's my spousal support obligation, here's my child support obligation. And maybe there's, we treat half our income as separate property, or we treat our income as separate property and I'm responsible for those expenses. And then whatever we decide we want to be as community property, we contribute towards a joint account and we buy assets together using that.
That's smart. Okay. Have you seen any prenup clauses that have surprised you in the past as a lawyer on the receiving end when it comes to divorce, where you're just like, how is that even possible?
Listen, I've seen infidelity clauses, but in California, they, will not be upheld because they're against public policy. So, I've seen those. I would say more often than not, I think clients who have entered into prenuptial agreements, in many cases, from 30 years ago or 20 years ago, sometimes the prenuptial agreements are not well drafted. So number one, to make sure that you have a well drafted agreement. Number 2, make sure that the the lawyers that prepare the agreement, presuming you have lawyers, actually specialize in family law in the state that which you are entering into that agreement. Because I've seen, agreements where it's, the family lawyer or corporate lawyer or somebody else, drafted an agreement and it doesn't have all the, bells and whistles. So you have clients who think that they have let's say a valid prenup or postnuptial agreement, where I have to tell them, hey, there are real problems with this agreement and you have extraordinary liability or exposure because you didn't do it right up front. And then the third pitfall I would see is that, clients, they think they understand what the prenup says and what their rights are. And they don't really understand what it says, or it says something else. And that can be a huge surprise because, their spouse may say, oh, this is our home. This is our home. And you think it's your home, but it's really not your home. And per the prenup, it's still their home.
How do you what would you advise is the best way for an individual to educate themselves on these types of things? Because there's so many terms out there. And of course, I'm a big fan, like everyone hire a lawyer, get someone that can guide you. But how can you educate yourself before you say, hey, Jackie, I want to talk to you about hiring you? Like what are some resources that someone can go to or I guess just educate themselves in some way, shape, or form to understand their state laws?
Yeah. Well, I would say consult with an attorney, and maybe even consult with three. Okay. So you understand, because different lawyers have different vibes, I'll say it that way, or different approaches. I would say that I'm a very collaborative kind of lawyer, and I'm going to tell it to you in a very upfront manner with empathy, right? And some lawyers are not that way, and somebody may want a different type of personality. So number one, consult with different lawyers. I mean, you can absolutely research the laws of your state, but I would never rely on ChatGPT to tell you tell you what the law is. And of course, in this digital age, we have clients who will come and, present you with, here's this dissertation of the law of I did X, Y, and Z issue. I did it. Why are you telling me something else? I'm like, well, because that's not really the law. And that's not how you're going to apply the law to these circumstances. And nothing will replace the time, expertise of a lawyer who's had years of experience. So I would not rely on, AI.
I love that. I completely agree with you. I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially around these days. What's something that you've seen commonly? Because, okay, so, prenups, pre-marriage, get into it early on, before you get engaged, well before you get married, have these discussions, look at it, kind of like an operating agreement for your marriage, for your life.
Absolutely.
Especially hopefully people who are from those worlds can look at it like that and respect it and accept it like that. Getting into, unfortunately, sometimes, I'm hoping and betting that people with prenups usually more likely, statistically speaking, causation, correlation, still trying to figure that out, is if you have a prenup, it's less likely that you're going to get divorced. But in the case of, life, sometimes stuff just happens and you end up needing to divorced. So what are some things now, flip side, putting your divorce hat on, that you've seen on the receiving end of people putting into prenups that are just ridiculous and frivolous, or things people have completely forgotten to put into a prenup, and you sit down and you're like, wait, you're actually completely unprotected. Like, this prenup is not going, that you should have thought about XYZ.
Well, I think a couple of things. One is really not having a well-drafted prenup. So a client comes and they said, hey, we have this prenup from 20 years ago. It's been in the drawer. And then I look at it and I'm like, well, it doesn't have any of the legal protections that you need, any of the right language, that, for example, if somebody has a spousal support waiver, right? But it doesn't have all the language that you need so that it is totally protective and will be enforceable. Or the clients don't have proper full financial disclosures, and there's not a waiver for their disclosure. Or they didn't wait. In California, we have a 7-day waiting period before you sign. And they didn't, let's say, wait the 7 days before they signed the agreement, from the final agreement until signature. So there are a multitude of different things that I say. And then it's, you have to recalibrate, right? Because they have expectations. And I think one of the things with a divorce is, pay for peace of mind. Even though you may expect or want X, Y, and Z, realize you don't want to talk to me or be spending the money on my fees in 6 months from now or a year from now. It is so much more important to just give your spouse, or be a little bit more generous with your spouse, so that this can be over, because you have no surety of what the court's going to do. The legal process can be very unjust, and it's very time consuming and emotionally draining. And it can literally take years off your life, with the amount of stress. It's just not worth it. It's not worth it. And you have no idea if the judge has read, the papers, understands the legal issues, and when you're going to be heard.
Mm-hmm. How do you navigate that? Because I bet you saw it so much in your previous job of egos in a boardroom, but personal egos just seem to really hurt people in these types of situations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think with any divorce, you've got to check your ego at the door, and in so many ways, going through a breakup or even getting married, so many things are out of your control, right? And, so many clients feel this loss of control. And I think one of the things is as important as an advocate is to let them give them the control that they need. And, listen, many times your family is breaking up and you have children and you're seeing your children half the time, which is already devastating enough. 2, you have to sell your marital home, right? And this life that you've built. 3 is, 2 households are more expensive than 1. So you are in complete, potentially financial disarray or, and it just all of these things that you cannot control. And the more control that you can have in just, let's move on, the better it is. Now, that doesn't always work, right? You can have other parties on the other side who are obstinate and just want to fight, but it's not worth the money.
So, thinking about that, what are some things that you've seen couples do and or individuals to help a divorce go well? What are some things, say you're, let's just throw out an example. You're 4 years into marriage and you have 1 kid and you realize it's not working and nothing bad has necessarily happened, but it's just not working. What could someone do who's maybe not the breadwinner in the relationship do to prepare themselves to say, hey, this isn't working, and not maybe get too much resentment or just what can people do to have a good divorce? Does good divorce exist?
Good divorce. I mean,
good divorce doesn't exist.
It does exist. I've had many clients who have had very amicable divorces, and I believe in amicable divorces because, just because the relationship is over, it doesn't mean you guys have to hate each other. With that, one of the things is be financially prepared. Understand what your finances are, A, going into a marriage, B, during your marriage, and 3, leaving a marriage. So have, your ducks in a row, understand that, meet with somebody and, make sure that you're looking at your tax returns. Make sure you know how much income your spouse has or is making each year. Make sure that you know what your respective credit scores are. Do not leave those things to chance because, I've had so many devastating stories where clients don't know that their spouse took out a second mortgage on their home without their knowledge or consent, obviously, or signed tax returns on their behalf, or, racked up extraordinary debt that they did not know about, or made a bad investment that has resulted, and now they have to sell their home, whatever it is. But, just be on top of it, be on top of your finances and be partners. Going through the divorce process, I think mediation is great. Don't fight to fight. And I said that, and pay for peace of mind. Be a little bit more generous to make it go away because you're going to spend far more in legal fees fighting over the issue than it's probably worth.
So I assume that, if you don't have children, it's probably easier to get a divorce quicker, et cetera. Maybe not, probably not always.
Depends.
Since people's still resentment and egos. But, one of the things that I still get asked often is, can I put child support in and custody in a prenup? And I'm like, no. But what are there things that, once a couple say, I get married, I have a prenup, I get pregnant, I have a child, are there things that a couple can do after marriage once they have children, well before they're even thinking of getting divorced, from a legal perspective? Can they do add-ons? Can they do adjustments to prenups? Is that a thing?
Yeah. So You are correct. You cannot address custody or child support in a prenuptial agreement. You can really are limited to, property settlements and support. One of the things that couples can do are enter into what are referred to postnuptial agreements, which are after after they get married. I have had many clients who have come to me to make modifications to their prenuptial agreements because circumstances changed, or who did not enter into a prenuptial agreement or didn't have time before the marriage who want to enter into a postnuptial agreement to address certain issues. I've had clients who want to try to work on their marriage, but in order to do that and not file for divorce, they want financial security in the event their marriage doesn't work out. So for example, if you have a circumstance where your spouse has, substance abuse issues and you really want to be financially separated from them, or you are having, issues in your marriage and you're about to IPO on a separate property business, or, you're going to inherit a lot of money unexpectedly, or you are going to inherit money that was expected, and you just want to cross your T's and dot your I's or transmute certain of those assets from your separate property to community property. I've also had clients where, there's been infidelity in their relationship, and in order to rebuild the trust, they needed to have, some financial breaks, and wanted to define what that looked like with sunset provisions, kind of like a Band-Aid, I like to call it, to help rebuild the trust to see if their marriage was going to make it.
So yeah, let's chat a little bit more about sunset provision, since you did find me on TikTok, and one of the most popular videos I posted on there was about sunset provisions. And I had so many people DM me and be like, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that existed. And it's fascinating. It is kind of like, I joke that it's, you're like a startup entrepreneur and you have a vesting period and a cliff and all that. But how do you look at sunset clauses?
I think it's, great. Sometimes you have clients who, for whatever reasons, are getting married sooner than they would anticipate getting married. And so they may say, for the first 3 years, there's going to be no community property. And then after, to really see if the marriage is going to work or not. And then, after, X years, we're going to waive our rights to our separate property, or, in the marital home, or in the vacation home, or in certain assets, or I'm going to transmute again certain assets from separate property to community property. I think they're great. I think as long as you understand what you are signing up for and it's in line with your financial goals together as a couple.
So postnups.
Yeah.
People that do not get prenups, right? I have a friend who just said, we meant to get one, we were talking about it, and then the wedding got in the way, life gets in the way, and then we didn't do it. What are your thoughts around postnups, and when do you think an appropriate time to do them is?
Okay, so totally depends. So again, I have clients who come in for postnups to modify terms of the prenup. And this could include just saying, here are the terms of the prenups, but, we're going to buy this new home together and our parents are helping us. So we're going to make a tweak to the prenup based on this specific asset in the postnup, or again, the infidelity or many different provisions. I think it really depends on what your reasons are for entering into the postnuptial agreement. So if it was your intention to enter into a prenuptial agreement and you guys just didn't do it, do it as soon as possible after you're married so that you guys can just resolve the issues. If it's related to a specific issue or asset, then address it right away.
Okay. That makes sense. So, post-divorce, people are trying to recover emotionally, financially, once the dust does settle. Like, how do you recommend? It's probably a relief in a way when someone signs that paper and says, okay, it's over. But like, what are other suggestions that you have for folks to kind of rebuild themselves? Because you probably see it all the time.
All the time. And I wish, by the way, it settled totally after, they signed their divorce decree or their judgment. But in many cases, you're still dealing with post-judgment issues like dividing assets and, the next year's, the tax returns for that year's and reconciliations and whatever it is. So, even though you sign and you made a deal, you're still, lingering on in so many times, to rebuild yourself. Have a great therapist, right? And really work on healing and dealing with whatever you need to deal with to move on. Make sure that you're financially secure. So go back to work, make sure that you are staying in line with make sure that you stay in line with what your financial resources are or your support payments. Just be present in your own life.
Do you think that, do you have clients that come back to you post-divorce and like, hey, I'm getting married again, I need a prenup? You've already seen like how the first thing went. How can we prepare ourselves the second time around? And, are you seeing more first-time couples or more second-time couples coming in for prenups?
Both. I mean, a lot of first time, but I do have many repeat clients who come in for, they're going to move in with their partner. So they want a cohabitation agreement, or they're going to get married again and they need a prenup. Yeah.
What are some of the, I'm just curious, like, are there any funny, situations that you've had to deal with prenups that you're like, I didn't even know, someone would want to put that in one, whether it's, I don't know. Someone told me a story about an iguana in a prenup. I had never heard of that before. Like, just anything that's
trying to protect the pet.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'd also was like, I've heard about dog nups, but iguana nup, that took me out.
Yeah, that's a new one. Well, in California, the law changed a couple of years ago. So pets are no longer seen as property, and the court can really consider the best interest of the pet when awarding them to somebody. So I think if you do want your pet, to ensure they're yours, yes, you can address it. And I have had clients who wanted to, address that. I think, oh man, funny little tidbits. I don't know. I think I don't know.
So I know you've worked with some incredible celebrity clients. Is there really any difference between working with celebrity clients and, the regular folks out there?
At the end of the day, we're all human. So no, but you are dealing with a divorce on a very public scale, and the public scrutiny or the press on the divorce and your breakup can be very difficult. And so I would say for my, public, facing client or public figure clients, that's probably the most challenging. And it's really important to keep things out of the press. In many cases, I resolve, the divorce before anything's ever filed. And yeah, I mean, that's really the big difference.
So, I mean, this is why I was so excited to chat with you also today, is everyone this week has been sending me these DMs of these clips of All's Fair. I know it comes out this week. Kim Kardashian, a few other people. Since you are an incredible female divorce lawyer, how do you feel about the show coming out?
Oh, I think it's great. I mean, divorce lawyers are in vogue, right? But, it is based off of or inspired by, Laura Wasser and her partners who I work on many cases against all the time, and who I have, incredible esteem and respect for. But I think it's great. It's going to be fun. I'm sure it's going to bring the drama, and it'll be interesting to see what they come up with.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I know that people are going to be really excited to listen to this because there have been a lot of questions floating around recently. And so you've answered quite a few. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Any words of advice or wisdom?
Sure. So I think the biggest words of advice that I would give to people are, number one, talking about money should not be a taboo subject. And the earlier you talk about it in your relationship, the better your relationship's going to be. And if you can't talk about money, the likelihood of your relationship being successful is slim to none. Two is always know what's going on financially in your life, because even if your spouse is, you don't think that you would be responsible for your spouse's actions, well, think again. In many cases, you will be held responsible, and your estate can be held responsible. And three, enter into a prenup. It's one of the best things that you can do for your relationship.
I think one of the things that we keep seeing on social media and everywhere, TikTok, is, how people are so disillusioned isn't maybe the right word, but when you're so in love and you don't want to kind of rock the boat, right? You're like, oh, everything's going to be fine. We're never going to get divorced. Why would we do a prenup if we think we're going to get to, like, I'm in love with this person. I don't need to do any of this. Like, what are your views on that?
Yeah. I mean, we are taught to have blinders on when it comes to love. And so many individuals, and particularly I think women, are trained and programmed, right, with this multi-billion dollar, wedding industry to be the bride. But marriage is a partnership. And it is so much more than one extraordinary and expensive day. So I would say, talk about money early and understand that marriage is a partnership. It is not being a bride. It is not just putting on the white dress, and, be a partner.
How, with the industry being so extreme, excessive, whatever you might want to call it, how and where do you see family law fitting more into the future of it, right? Like these discussions happening earlier, becoming more normcore. What do you think is going to happen in this space? And do you think a prenup is just going to become part of the, trajectory of marriage? Is like as simple as going to get a, Zola website and account? Like how do we normalize it? What do we do to make it more normal?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think divorce is no longer a taboo. And couples are recognizing early on that the divorce rates are still in high 40s, 50%. So there's more of a pragmatic approach going into it. We live in a digital world, and there are so many more resources, including, digital platforms such as, Hello Prenup or First or, divorce.com even to get divorced. So there are the resources available for you to have the support that you need, whether it's going into a marriage or getting divorced. And you should utilize the resources that you have if you cannot afford an attorney. But I would always say, even if you use a digital platform, always consult with an attorney. And if you don't like the advice that the first attorney gave you, get a second opinion just to make sure that what you are hearing is sound.
What do you have, what are your recommendations for someone looking for an attorney?
So definitely ask your friends or family members. And I think it really depends. You can always look on super lawyers, to find lawyers that are reputable in your location, professional colleagues that you admire or respect who may have, individuals who they would recommend. If you're not vibing, I'll say it that way, with the attorney that you meet with, or you just aren't the right fit, definitely consult with somebody else. Maybe consult with 3 people just so that you feel heard, feel safe with whoever you are going to have this relationship, attorney-client relationship with, because these are going to be very big decisions in your life, and you want to ensure that you have the support that you need to navigate them.
To that point, I've definitely chatted with some friends who kind of were like, okay, I went with the first one. And then by the end of the prenuptial experience, they're like, I never want to work with that attorney. Please don't ever contact that attorney. Like, don't bring them into your, orbit in your world. How do you figure out an attorney's vibe? Like, what is a good way to know someone in the space?
I would say you should ask what their approach is to prenuptial agreements. My approach is very collaborative. It's important that the couples actually get married and that they have this incredible life, and you navigate these difficult conversations, which many times individuals, what's really important for individuals is to understand is everybody has a different relationship with money and assets and property. And that is based on, your childhood, what your parents' relationship with money is, what your career trajectory is, all of these different aspects. And I think if you take a step back and understand, well, you feel unsafe and you need more security when it comes to support, when it comes to, finances, and you think that money's just going to be there the next day, or you like to spend because you think you're only going to live once, and reaching compromises as it relates to both of your relationships with money so that you can have a life that is reflective of your joint goals.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, we're going to end it on that. This was perfect. Yeah. Jackie, thank you so much for taking the time. And I'm so happy we connected.
So happy we connected, and thank you, TikTok and Instagram.
Truly.